Relax and listen to the voice. The boy with the brass buttons. A young couple were delighted to purchase the old-fashioned house in the Stuyvesant Square section of Philadelphia. They moved into their dream home in the winter of 1889, bringing their 6-year-old daughter with them. There was a lot of refurbishing to do, so the little girl tended to go up to the attic to play while her parents were occupied with the house. It wasn't as bad as it sounds, because the previous owners had converted the attic into a playroom. It even had a fireplace at one point, but it was currently boarded up. After a couple of weeks of hard work, the downstairs rooms were finished. The mother, realizing that she had been neglecting their daughter, attempted to try and spend more time with her now, but the little girl seemed distracted. She kept stealing back up to the attic to play alone. Exasperated, and perhaps a little hurt that the child was not being responsive to her attentions, the mother finally asked, "What's so interesting up there in that stuffy old room?" "It's the boy with the shiny buttons," the child replied. "He's so much fun to play with." "What little boy?" the mother demanded, wondering if a servant child had stowed away in the room. She went upstairs to investigate, but she found the room empty. Certain that her daughter was just being contrary, she urged her husband to discipline the child. At her father's stern voice, the little girl became hysterical. She kept repeating that there was a little boy, and he wore a blue jacket with lots of shiny buttons on it. As her father listened, he became more and more curious. Formerly a seaman, he realized his daughter was describing a child's sailor suit, complete with the brass buttons. The girl's father made some inquiries about the Cowderleys, the family that lived in the house before them. He learned that they had come from England, bringing their children with them, 2 boys and a girl. The youngest child, a boy, was mentally handicapped. The neighbors described him as a sweet idiot child, and added that Mr. Cowderley was ashamed of him and tried to prevent him from being seen outdoors. According to the boy's parents, the neighbors continued, the young boy would often sneak out to go down by the river. The story goes on to say that one day he fell in and drowned. His body was never recovered, but his cap had been found floating in the river. Shortly after the disappearance, the Cowderleys put the house up for sale, and then left Philadelphia, dropping out of sight. The former seaman's suspicions were now thoroughly aroused. He accompanied his little daughter to the attic and asked her to show him where the little boy came from. She pointed to the boarded-up fireplace. Her father called in workers to open it and then to remove the mortar that cemented up a cavity beside the chimney. As the mortar was chipped away, the corpse of a small boy was revealed. He was clothed in a little blue sailor jacket with 4 rows of brass buttons down the front. Further examination revealed that the back of the child's head had been crushed by a violent blow. The little boy didn't drown. He was murdered. The dance. The girl hurried through her schoolwork as fast as she could. It was the night of the high school dance, along about 70 years ago in the town of Kingville, Texas. The girl was so excited about the dance. She had bought a brand new sparkly red dress for the dance. She knew she looked smashing in it. It was going to be the best evening of her life. Then her mother came in the house, looking pale and determined. "You are not going to that dance," her mother said. "But why?" the girl asked her mother. "I've just been talking to the preacher. He says the dance is going to be for the devil. We're absolutely forbidden to go," her mother said. The girl nodded as if she accepted her mother's words, but she was determined to go to the dance. As soon as her mother was busy, she put on her brand new red dress and ran down to the KC Hall where the dance was being held. As soon as she walked into the room, all the guys turned to look at her. She was startled by all the attention. Normally, no one noticed her. Her mother sometimes accused her of being too awkward to get a boyfriend. But she was not awkward that night. The boys in her class were fighting with each other to dance with her. Later, she broke away from the crowd and went to the table to get some punch to drink. She heard a sudden hush. The music stopped. When she turned, she saw a handsome man with jet black hair and clothes standing right next to her. "Dance with me," he said. She managed to stammer a yes, completely stunned by this gorgeous man. He led her out onto the dance floor. The music sprang up at once. She found herself dancing better than she had ever danced before, and they were the absolute center of attention. Then the man spun her around and around. She gasped for breath, trying to step out of the spin, but he spun her faster and faster. Her feet began to feel hot. The floor seemed to melt under her. He spun her even faster. She was spinning so fast that a cloud of dust flew up around them both so that they were hidden from the crowd. When the dust settled, the girl was gone. The man in black bowed once to the crowd and disappeared. The devil had come to his party, and he had spun the girl all the way to hell. The elevator operator. Herman was spending the night with some friends who lived in the country. He went to bed late and did not sleep well at all that night. Off in the distance, he thought he heard the sound of a horse-drawn carriage. He got up, went to the window, and looked out. There, in the full moon, he saw the carriage he had heard right outside of the house. The carriage looked like it was carrying a coffin. The driver of the carriage looked up at the window where Herman stood. The driver's face was ghostly pale and very thin. While staring up at Herman, the driver shouted, "All aboard!" Herman stepped back from the window and laid back down on the bed. He eventually fell back into a fitful sleep. The next morning, he told his friends about the carriage and the driver, and they all decided that he just must have had a very bad dream. Later on that day, Herman went back home to his apartment in the city. Just as he had started to board the elevator, he looked at the elevator operator. He saw the same pale, thin face that had belonged to the carriage driver. The elevator operator looked at Herman and said, "All aboard!" Herman stepped back from the elevator and stood as if in a trance until a few moments later he was startled by a loud crash. The elevator cable had broken and the elevator had plummeted down, killing everyone on board. Later investigation discovered that the elevator operator had been a temporary employee and hired only for that one day. The evil in the room. Marcia Bennett told me this story herself. She had been north to visit friends in the state of Washington. Now she was driving back to her home in California. The last lap of the day's journey was over the Cascade Range that stretches from Washington to California. It was late in the evening, and snow had started to fall before she finally reached the little Oregon town where she planned to spend the night. Tired and ready for a hot meal and a good night's sleep, she stopped at the first place she came upon. It was an old hotel on the main street. The lobby had a musty odor. The seedy clerk behind the desk signed her in. Her room was on the third floor, room 310. She helped an elderly bellhop with her luggage. As soon as the door to the room was open, a blast of hot air struck Marcia full in the face. Along with the hot air came something else, something she could not define, but that filled her with dread. It was heavy and depressing, she explained, with a strong scent of evil. She felt as if she were about to faint. All she said was, "Oh, it's awfully hot." The bellhop tinkered with the radiator knobs. Then he opened the window and left. The room began to cool off, but the feeling of despair and dread grew even stronger. It centered on the open square of black window space. The terror seemed to speak in her mind. "Go to the window," it said. "Throw yourself out, out, out." Terrified, Marcia flung herself on the bed furthest from the window. "I kept saying, 'No, no, no,' to that voice," she told me, but the voice kept insisting. "You can't fight me, you puny thing," it said. "Sooner or later you'll jump. I'll make you jump, jump, jump." At last, Marcia could stand it no longer. She jumped up, calling herself a coward. "Coward or not," she explained, "I was sure that if I stayed the night, I'd be dead by morning." Marcia was prepared to sacrifice the money she'd already paid just to leave, but when she went downstairs with her baggage to check out, The clerk never asked what was wrong or if she wanted to try another room. He returned the full cash amount to her with no questions asked. Marcia drove down the street to a modern hotel. As she entered the lobby, she felt the dark depression slip from her shoulders. She became almost giddy with relief. She'd planned to be on her way early next morning. Instead, she decided to stay over a day and look into the history of the old hotel to see if she could discover the reason for her terrifying experience there. She visited the local library to make a few inquiries. An elderly librarian sat behind the desk. "I'm just wondering," Marcia said tentatively, "did anything shocking ever happen in the old hotel?" The librarian looked at her strangely. "How did you come upon that bit of history?" she asked. "It took the hotel a long time to squash the story." The librarian went on to tell what happened. One evening, back in 1948, a couple checked into the hotel as Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Smith. The next morning, hotel employees found the young woman's body lying on the sidewalk outside the hotel beneath room 310. The man who had registered as her husband had disappeared. At first they assumed suicide, the librarian concluded, but then they pried open her fist and found she was clutching a handful of dark curly hair, not her own hair. So they made a search for the murderer, but he was never found. "By the way," the librarian suddenly added, "isn't that a coincidence? It all happened on November 5th, 40 years ago yesterday." The Girl Who Stood on a Grave. Some boys and girls were at a party one night. There was a graveyard down the street, and they were talking about how scary it was. "Don't ever stand on a grave after dark," one of the boys said. "The person inside will grab you. He'll pull you under." "That's not true," one of the girls said. "It's just a superstition." "Oh yeah? Well, I'll give you $1 if you stand on a grave," said the boy. "A grave doesn't scare me," said the girl. "I'll do it right now." The boy handed her his knife. "Stick this knife in one of the graves," he said. "Then we'll know you were there." The graveyard was filled with shadows and was as quiet as death. "There's nothing to be scared of," the girl told herself, but she was scared anyway. She picked out a grave and stood on it. Then quickly she bent over and plunged the knife into the soil and started to leave. But she couldn't get away. Something was holding her back. She tried a second time to leave, but she couldn't move. She was filled with terror. "Something has got me," she screamed, and she fell onto the ground. When she didn't come back, the others went to look for her. They found her body sprawled across the grave. Without realizing it, she had plunged the knife through her skirt and had pinned it to the ground. It was only the knife that had held her. She had died of fright. The Hitchhiking Woman. Tom had just left a party and was driving down a dark road all by himself. It was about 12:30 at night and pouring down rain. He'd only driven about 2 miles when he saw this faint figure walking on the side of the road. As he got closer, he realized it was a young lady, and she was wearing a long white dress. He pulled over and asked her if she would like a ride. She said that she would, and she hopped in the front seat. He noticed she was shivering from the rain, so he took off his jacket and offered it to her. She draped the jacket over her shoulders, and they started to talk about nothing in particular. She thanked him and draped the jacket over her shoulders, and they started to talk about nothing in particular. When Tom pulled up to her house, he turned to ask her something, but she was gone. Puzzled, he thought maybe she had already ran into her house. The following day, Tom realized the girl had left in such a rush that she forgot to give him back his jacket. He remembered where her house was and drove there since he didn't have a phone number to call. He knocked on the door, and an older woman answered. Tom told her he was there to pick up his jacket that her daughter had from the night before. The woman looked at him strangely and told him he must have the wrong house. The man was sure this was the right place, and he dropped the girl off, so he began to describe her and what she was wearing. The old lady was shaken, visibly, and began to cry. She explained to Tom that her only daughter died 10 years ago on prom night. and that Tom had described her exactly. She said her daughter was buried up the road at Meadowwood Cemetery. After Tom left the old lady's house, he decided to go find the girl's grave. There, laying on her headstone, was his jacket. The Joker. There was once a girl who was at home alone because her parents were away on holiday. Late at night, she started to hear sounds like small footsteps. She just thought to herself that it was the rain. Later, she heard sounds like drip, drip, drip. She got brave and she went outside to turn off all the taps and turn off any water sources anywhere else. She then heard sounds under her bed and put her hand under the bed to feel if her dog would lick her hand. It did. She still heard drip, drip, drip. So she went to the bathroom and saw her dog hung up in the shower, dripping with blood. And on the mirror was written in blood, "Dogs aren't the only things that lick." The grave. A young woman lay suffering on her deathbed, her stillborn baby lying against her chest. Her young husband crouched close, stricken with grief. His beautiful wife crooned a lullaby to their dead baby, her voice growing fainter as death drew near. Finally, she looked at her husband and asked him to bury her back east, beside her dead mother. Choked with grief, the young husband agreed. But after his wife lay still in death, her husband could not bear to be parted from her and their dead child. He had them buried together beneath a lonely pine tree on a gently sloping knoll near their home, where he could visit the grave. As spring drew near, fragrant wildflowers bloomed all across the knoll in a small grave. One night the husband threw himself across the flower-strewn grave, head buried in his arms as he tried to control his grief. As he lay there, the stillness of the night seemed to deepen. A light breeze tousled his hair and swayed the branches of the pine tree. At that moment, he heard a soft voice crooning a lullaby. He started upright, searching about for his wife. He heard a gurgle from an infant, a happy sound of contentment. Then the breeze died away, and the branches of the pine tree stilled. Then a shining light seemed to descend from the dark sky and hover over the young husband and the small grave under the tree. The husband heard the singing again and the happy laugh of a small child. And then there was darkness. The husband went home that night with peace in his heart for the first time since the death of his wife. People say that on dark summery nights you can still hear the young mother singing a lullaby and hear the happy chuckles of her tiny baby. The Skeleton Lady. This story begins not too long ago and not too far away from here. Just to the north, there's country where it's winter for 7 long months out of the year. Now, this particular winter had gone on much longer than usual, and the people were beginning to run out of food and firewood. Inside one small house, right out on the barren snowlands, an old lady was beginning to get anxious.
"Oh, my husband, I'm so cold and hungry. Look at me, my hands are blue. I'm going to die, I'm sure of it."
"Don't worry, my darling. Winter will be over soon. We will have food again."
But the old lady looked very ill and continued to get anxious. Eventually, the old man agreed.
"Very well, my darling. I will go and search for food. But before I go, you must promise me one thing. You must not use the last 2 logs we have for the fire. We will need them to cook the food when I return."
Okay, I agree. Just go. Please go and find food."
With that, the old man went out in search of food. Time passed, and the old man did not return. The fire was beginning to get lower and lower.
"Where is he? I'm hungry. I'm freezing. I'm sure I will die."
Then the old lady had an idea.
If I put just one of the logs on the fire, he will be back soon, and then we will still have one to cook the food with. Yes, that's what I'll do.
The old lady picked up one log and placed it on the fire.
Oh, that's much better. I'm so warm. He'll be back with food soon.
The old lady forgot how hungry she was as she sat close to the warm fire, but more time passed, and still her husband did not return. It was beginning to get dusk outside, and again the fire was getting lower and lower.
Where is he? He must have found food and eaten it. I'm gonna be left here to freeze.
And then the old lady had another idea.
He must be back soon. If I put the last log on the fire, it will be hot and ready to cook when he returns.
With that, the old lady put the last log on the fire. But more time passed and the old man was not back. The last log began to burn lower and lower until all that was left was a tiny flicker. The old lady got closer and closer to the fire. Then suddenly, ouch! She burned herself on it and began to bleed. She placed a finger in her mouth to lick it.
This tastes good.
And then the old lady began to chew.
So good.
She began to chew up her arm and around her body. Until all that was left was a skeleton.
That was so good. I feel much better, but I'm still hungry.
Just at that moment, she heard a rustling outside, and the door opened. In came her husband with 2 rabbits in his hand.
Look, my wife, I found food.
The old lady ran towards him and grabbed the rabbits.
These look good. My husband, I've just realized how meaty you are. Come here, I want to eat you. I want meat.
With that, the old man burst out the door and ran into the frozen wastelands as fast as he could. Behind him, the old lady was running.
I want meat. I'm going to eat you.
But luckily, the old man could run fast and began to escape his wife. He ran further and further into the snow. In the distance was the sound of the old lady.
I want meat. I'm going to eat you. I want meat. I'm going to eat you.
Suddenly, the old man came to the edge of a huge gorge that went as far as he could see. There was no way across, and coming closer was the sound of his wife.
I want meat. I'm going to eat you.
Then the old man noticed a small wooden cottage. He ran to it and banged on the door. The door opened on a chain, and a woman could be seen inside.
Yes? How can I help you?
It's my wife. She's gone crazy. She's going to eat me.
Very well. I will help you. But first you must bring me a bucket of water.
What? She's gonna eat me, and you want water?
Yes.
Okay. I'll bring you water.
The old man searched around and found a bucket to get some water from the well. He took it to the woman, who pulled out a ladle from her pocket and dipped it into the water.
Ah, yes. Very good. Now I'll help you.
In the distance, the sound of the skeleton lady was very close.
I want meat. I'm going to eat you.
The woman from the house came outside. She stood at the edge of the gorge and she stamped her feet into the ground. She then reached out and stretched to the other side of the gorge and grabbed onto a tree.
Now you may cross.
The old man walked carefully across the lady's back and reached the other side. Then the woman let go and
Ping.
she went right back to the other side. She returned into her house. Just then the skeleton lady arrived at the gorge.
I will get you, my husband. I will eat you. I want meat.
She banged on the door of the house.
Yes? Can I help you?
You're too skinny to eat, but you will help me cross the gorge.
Very well, I will help you, but first you must bring me a drink of water.
Help me now or I'll eat you anyway.
Okay. With that, the woman stood on the side of the gorge and stamped her feet into the ground. She stretched and stretched across the gorge and grabbed onto the tree. The old woman began to run across her back.
I want meat. I will eat you. I want meat.
When she was halfway across the gorge, the woman let go and
Ping.
went back to the start.
I want meat.
The skeleton lady fell to the ground and shattered into a million pieces. Now, at the beginning, I said that this happened not too long ago and not too far away. It is said that there's a little bit of magic in each piece of the skeleton lady's bone, and that one day they'll join together again and come in search of meat. The Telltale Seaweed. Two sisters were motoring through Cape Cod late one stormy night in the early 1900s when their car broke down in an unpopulated area. Seeing an old neglected house nearby, they went to the door and tugged on the bell pull. When no one answered, they looked through a nearby window whose shutter was banging in the bitter wind. The window was broken. Through the window, they could see a library. The dust lay heavy over everything. The women decided to take shelter for the night and find someone to tow the car the next day. They brought blankets in from the car, their feet leaving tracks in the thick dust of the floor as they settled in for the night. Sometime later, they were both suddenly awakened. A bedraggled sailor, dripping wet, while standing next to the fireplace, as if he were looking to dry himself off before a non-existent fire. The sailor was glowing in the dark. The braver of the sisters finally called out in a strangled tone, "Who's there?" The sailor muttered something they could not make out and disappeared. Deciding it was all a dream, the sisters lay back down to sleep, but the next morning they found a patch of wet salt water by the fireplace and a piece of seaweed, and there were no footprints in the dust by the fireplace but their own. The sisters hurried out to their car. Soon, they were given to tow to the nearest village by a passing motorist. There they asked about the abandoned house. They were told the house had been empty for years. The people who owned it had a son who was driven from home by his father, and he had drowned at sea. The family had moved away because they claimed strange things kept happening at night. A few months later, one of the sisters told her tale at a dinner party. A museum curator seated near her volunteered to test the seaweed for her. The curator sent her a message several days later. The message simply said that the seaweed she had found in the abandoned house was a rare type of seaweed, a type of seaweed that was only found on dead bodies. The Walk. My uncle was walking down a lonely dirt road one day. He came upon a man who was also walking down that road. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was scared of my uncle, and my uncle was scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and it began to get dark. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was very scared of my uncle, and my uncle was very scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and they came to a big wood. It was getting darker. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at that man. The man was really scared of my uncle, and my uncle was really scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and deep down into the woods they went. It was getting darker. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at that man. The man was terribly scared of my uncle, and my uncle was terribly scared of everything. The Welcome Inn. Susie and her mother were on summer vacation. They had enjoyed a wonderful day at the beach and had stayed longer than they had expected. They were driving home very late at night when a fierce thunderstorm broke out. Susie's mother could hardly see to drive. Then, suddenly, in the glare of some lightning, they saw a house with a sign in front that said "Welcome In." Susie's mother thought it would be a good idea to stop for the night and go home in the morning. They parked in front of the door, hurried up the stairs which led to the front door, and knocked. An elderly woman in rather outdated clothes answered the door with a smile. She welcomed them into the house as if she had been expecting them. After enjoying a warm meal, the woman took them to a cozy room to stay the night. Susie and her mother slept soundly. When they awoke in the morning, the elderly woman could not be found. They decided to leave some money and a thank you note on the front hall table and be on their way. A few miles down the road, they stopped for gas. While paying for the gas, Susie's mother told the station attendant about the wonderful night they had spent at the Welcome Inn. With a look of surprise, the station attendant told Susie's mother that the Welcome Inn had burned down about 20 years before, and that the old woman who'd ran the place had lost her life in the fire. Susie and her mother went back to the inn in disbelief, but when they arrived at the place, where they had spent the night, all that they saw was a singed sign and a shell of the house. Where the front hall had been, there was a dilapidated table, and on that table was the envelope containing their thank you note and the money that they had left. The White House Ghosts. It is said that Lincoln's ghost haunts the White House. He appears in the room where the Lincoln bed is kept. Harry Truman once responded to a 3 o'clock knock on his door and found no one there. He attributed that knock to Lincoln. Lincoln is said to return to the White House when the security of the country is at risk. He strides up and down the second-floor hallway, raps on doors, and stands by certain windows with his hands clasped behind his back. One staff member claimed to have seen Lincoln sitting on his bed, pulling on his boots. A bodyguard to President Harrison was kept awake many nights trying to protect the president from mysterious footsteps he heard in the hall. He grew so tired and so worried, he finally attended a seance to beg the President Lincoln to stop so he could get enough sleep to properly protect the president. Abigail Adams' ghost was seen drifting through the closed doors of the East Room to hang the laundry during the Taft administration. A gardener claims to have spoken to the ghost of Dolly Madison, who reproved him for trying to remove the rose bushes she had planted over 100 years ago. In the 1930s, Andrew Jackson's ghost could be heard laughing in the Rose Room. In 1952, extensive repairs were done to the second floor of the White House. Ever since then, the ghosts have not been seen as often, and have apparently not been nearly as active. Tick, tick, slide. Once in the dead of night, there was an old woman in her house with her grandchildren. There was a knock at the door. The old lady, armed with nothing but an old rusted knife, gingerly opened the door. Standing there was a crazed lady her grandchildren called Mum. "Give me your children," she yelled in her drunken voice. With one swift movement, the old lady slashed the knife across the woman's hips, and her body fell to the ground. Hastily, the old lady slammed the door shut. The next night, the old lady heard tick, tick, slide. Tick, tick, slide. The children came bolting to their grandmother. The old lady then walked outside of her house and went to the playground next door. "I have come for you," said the crazed woman. No legs, just the body and arms. The crazed woman's nails dug into the ground as she dragged her body along the ground. Tick, tick, slide. The crazed woman slid over to the old woman and used her zombie-like hands to gouge the eyes of the old lady. Blood started seeping out of the old lady's face as she fell to the ground. Now, as you pass that very playground, you may hear the sounds. Tick, tick, slide. The Twin Pond Ghost. In 1972, when I was 17 years old, a friend had drowned in a pond on a farm. It's called the Twin Ponds because there are two ponds close together. He had been swimming with his cousins. His name was Gary, and he was 19 years old. He had natural curly shoulder-length black hair. About 1 or 2 months after he had died, his mother called me, wanting me to come and stay with her for a while, because she was alone. She lived in walking distance of the ponds in a small house that had 4 rooms downstairs and 1 room upstairs on a country road where there are not very many cars. Gary's room was one that was upstairs. The stairs were the type that had a wall on each side and a door at the bottom of the stairs. His mother told me that I could sleep in his room, but I didn't want to. Everything was still the same, just like he had left it. It still looked as if he would be back at any time, so I stayed in the bedroom downstairs, next to the stairs that led to his bedroom. One night, when I went to sleep, I was either sleepwalking or dreaming that I was walking down the road in the direction of Twin Ponds. There was a bright full moon. As I was standing there, wondering why I was walking alone on the road at night and where I was going, I saw someone walking up the road towards me from the ponds. As he got closer, I saw that it was Gary. I tried to speak to him, saying his name, but he wouldn't answer or look at me. He was walking at a slow pace, a few inches past me, with his head down and his eyes were half closed. I could have reached out and touched him, but for some reason I didn't. I saw that his hair was wet, but it wasn't raining. Water was dripping off of his hair and face, glistening in the moonlight. I watched him as he walked towards the house and disappeared. I guess he was going home. What happened next is where it gets strange, because I can swear that I was awake at this time. I woke up in bed, thinking about the dream I just had, when I got a funny feeling that I was being watched and that I was not alone. I turned over and looked at the open bedroom door. That's when I saw Gary standing there. He was leaning against the door wearing a blank stare and smiling at me. He was wearing a white shirt with a V-neck, long baggy sleeves and dark pants. The same thing that he was wearing when I saw him on the road in my dream. The curtains were open and the moonlight came through the window so I could see him clearly and everything in the room. I rose up on my elbow, smiling back at him. As I started to speak to him, he started moving towards me. That's when I became scared, and I threw the blankets over my head because he was not moving in a normal way. He was floating and gliding with his arms down to his sides, and I saw nothing below his knees. That was when I remembered that he was dead. I'd forgotten until then. While I was under the blankets, I started praying really fast, waiting for the blankets to move or for him to touch me. After a few minutes, it seemed like forever, I peeped out from under the blankets and saw nothing, so I jumped out of the bed and ran across the room and turned on the lights. I must have made a lot of noise when my feet hit the hardwood floor and getting to the wall where the light switch was, because his mother came running into the room from her bedroom with just her nightgown on and a worried look on her face, asking me what was wrong. I lied and told her that there was nothing wrong. It was embarrassing knowing that I had woken her up in the middle of the night, and also I didn't want to tell her that I had thought I'd just seen her son's ghost. Then she started laughing and said, "You're lying. You saw Gary, didn't you? I know you did. I can tell by the way you're acting and the look on your face. You're real pale. He won't hurt you. I promise. I see him all the time." I already knew he wouldn't hurt me. That wasn't what scared me. I wasn't scared of him until I remembered that he was dead. We went back to bed and I slept with the light on for the rest of the night. When it became daylight, I told her that I wanted to go home, but she wanted me to stay with her, telling me again that Gary wouldn't hurt me. It was beginning to get dark out again, and she could tell that I was becoming more scared and nervous, so she let me go home. I couldn't spend another night there. I still went and spent time with her during the day, but I wouldn't stay there at night. I would leave just before it started getting dark. She's died since then, and I know she's with her son now. It's been 30 years now. I still can't go to that house at night. The Window Viper. It was a dark and stormy night. There was a little girl just about your age getting ready to go to bed when she heard a knock on her door. A deep, raspy voice called out, "I am the Window Viper, and I'm on your front porch." The girl was scared and hid under her covers, hoping it would go away. The voice came again, a little louder this time. "I am the Window Viper, and I'm at your front door." Again, she buried her head deep in the covers and pretended no one was home. "I am the Window Viper. Let me come inside now." She didn't move, but the front door slowly creaked open and heavy footsteps came inside. "I am the Window Viper, and I am in your front hall." The voice was getting closer. She hoped that the voice would think she was gone and leave the house. "I am the Window Viper, and I am on the staircase." She could hear footsteps slowly approaching her bedroom. "I am the Window Viper, and I am in the hallway." Petrified, she gripped her lucky blanket and teddy bear as she heard the footsteps stop outside of her room. "I am the Window Viper, and I am at your doorway." Slowly, her door handle turned as a shadowy figure opened the door and stepped inside. The girl screamed. "I am the Window Viper, and I'm here to vipe your windows." Confused, she looked up and saw the old man holding a spray bottle, a rag, and a squeegee, soaking wet from the rain. She laughed to herself, got him some warm clothes, and went to bed while he did his work. Wait till Emmett comes. A preacher was riding to one of the churches on his circuit when darkness fell. It was about to storm, and the only house nearby was an old mansion which was reputed to be haunted. The preacher clutched his Bible and said, "The Lord will take care of me." He went into the mansion just as the storm broke. He put his horse into the barn and made his way into the house. The door was unlocked. He went into a large room which contained a fireplace that filled one wall. There was wood laid there for a fire. He laid a match to it. Then the preacher sat down to read his Bible. Gradually the fire burned down to a heap of coals as the storm howled around the mansion. The preacher was roused from his reading by a sound. He looked up from his Bible. A very large black cat was stretching itself. Then it walked into the fire and sat down among the red-hot coals. It picked a coal up in its paw and licked it slowly. The cat got up, shook off the ashes, and walked to the foot of the preacher's chair. It fixed blazing yellow eyes upon him, black tail lashing, and said quietly, "Wait until Emmett comes." The preacher jumped from Genesis to Matthew in shock. He had never heard of a cat talking before. Nervously, he kept reading his Bible, muttering to himself, "Oh, the Lord will take care of me." 2 minutes later, another cat came into the room. It was black as midnight, and as large as the biggest dog. It lay down among the red-hot coals, lazily batting them with its enormous paws. Then it walked over to the other cat and said, "What shall we do with him?" The first cat replied, "We should not do anything until Emmett comes." The two cats, black as midnight, sat watching the preacher, who read through the Gospels at top speed, aware of blazing yellow eyes watching him. A third cat, big as a tiger, entered the room. It went to the fire full of red-hot coals and rolled among them, chewing them and spitting them out. Then it came to the other two cats, facing the preacher in the chair. "What shall we do with him?" it growled to the others.
We should not do anything until Emmett comes, the other cats replied together.
The preacher flipped to Revelation, looking furtively around the room. He closed the Bible and stood up.
Good night, cats. I's glad of your company, but when Emmett comes, you done tell him I've been here and I went.
Dearly Poe. The trials and tribulations of living in today's modern society can tend to wear on our nerves. One can grow very weary of dealing with bills, taxes, insurance, traffic, and pollution, not to mention anything about keeping food in the refrigerator. Oftentimes the whole thing can make you want to holler and throw up both of your hands. And that's exactly what old Bill Smith did. He gave up all the luxuries, and if you ask me, some of the necessities of modern life. He loaded up just the barest of essentials and his 3 hunting dogs into his truck and moved way up into the North Georgia mountains. Smitty, that's what all of us folks in town call him, figured it wouldn't be that much of an adjustment. After all, he did love hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors. He did have a companionship of his 3 dogs, his best friends, I Know, You Know, and Comptico Calico. What more could a man ask for? Smitty built himself a nice little cabin way back in the woods. It wasn't very big, but it was just enough for him. The cabin only had 2 rooms, one he used for a bedroom, and the other that he used for every other room, the living room, dining room, den, and kitchen. He had built himself a nice big fireplace where he could cook his food and warm his body on chilly nights. He planted himself a nice little vegetable garden on the side of his house and would hunt and fish for most of his food. But at least once a month, he would drive the 25 miles down the mountain to the little store to buy those things that he couldn't provide for himself. During the warm months, Smitty had no problem catching as much small game as he needed, but the colder months proved to be a little more difficult for him to keep his stomach full. Well, it was on one of those cold wintry nights that Smitty went out to his storage shed to see what he could find for dinner. All he found was a small piece of fat back meat and a handful of rice. There was too much snow on the ground to travel the 25 miles to the store, so he had to make do with what he had. He ate the fat back and a little of the rice, but he gave most of the rice and the water where he had boiled his meat to the dogs. After all, they had to eat too. He called out, I know, you know, Comico Calico. Come on, doggies, I'll get you some of this here dinner. And those dogs came running in as fast as they could and lapped up all that rice mixture. Smitty was still a little hungry, but there wasn't much he could do about that. So despite the protests of his grumbling stomach, Smitty stoked the fire in the fireplace to keep the cabin warm, and he went to bed. The sound of the wind blowing around, and in some places through, the tiny cabin had almost lulled Smitty to sleep, when he heard something. He opened his eyes and saw a shadow on the wall. He eased out of bed and tiptoed into the other room. There, he saw the oddest-looking creature he had ever seen. It was short and stubby, with pointed ears and short, fat feet with long claws, and it had a long, bushy tail. There were no open doors or windows, so Smitty was confused as to how the funny-looking thing had gotten in. Smitty quietly picked up his axe, crept over to the odd critter, who was devouring an insect of some sort. He raised his axe and came down squarely on the creature's tail. Smitty turned to catch the varmint, but he was too quick. It hurriedly escaped, through the wall. So Smitty was left standing there with this long bushy tail and a blood-laden axe in his hand, and no sign of the funny-looking creature. Smitty was about to throw the old tail out the door, and his growling stomach reminded him of how hungry he still was. So he took that tail, cleaned it, cooked it with some of the herbs from his garden he had stored away, and he ate it. It didn't taste that bad. Actually, it kind of tasted like chicken. With his stomach finally full, Smitty got back to his warm, cozy bed. Smitty had just drifted off into a deep sleep when a strange sound awakened him. It sounded like something trying to scratch its way into the cabin, perhaps a raccoon. Smitty knew that if he stayed real quiet, it would probably go away, so he stayed as quiet as he could, but then he heard a strange, otherworldly voice, which hissed, "Dearly
I want my taily po.
Smitty thought the wind was playing tricks on his ears, but he heard it again.
Taily po. I want my taily po.
Smitty jumped out of bed, flung open the door, and called out to his dogs.
I know, you know, Comico Calico. Come over here and see what's making that noise.
The dogs came running, barking and sniffing around, but they didn't find anything at all, so Smitty put the dogs back outside and went back to bed. Sleep had just eased itself into Smitty's body when he heard the voice again. This time, the scratching sounded like it was at the window. Whatever it was, it really, really wanted to get in, but the scratching seemed to be on two walls at one time. Smitty called out,
Hey, who's that at my door? Get on away from here.
Then he heard the strange voice again, only this time a little louder.
Taily po, taily po. I want my taily po. Taily po. I'm coming in to get my taily po.
Old Smitty, who wasn't one to frighten easily, was getting a little bit shaky. This was getting really weird. So he eased to the window and called,
I know, you know, Comico Calico. Come on over here and see what's scratching at my house.
The three dogs bounded up the porch and they sniffed around and barked and sniffed, but they never found anything at all. Smitty decided to stay up for the rest of the night to protect himself, his dogs, and his little cabin. So he pulled a chair next to the fireplace, grabbed a blanket from his bed, and settled in for the rest of the wind-chilled wintry night. Sleep soon overtook him, and once again he dozed off. It was almost dawn when Smitty woke with a start. The sound of scratching seemed to reverberate from every area of the cabin. Smitty searched frantically for his axe, his rifle, or something to defend himself with, but he was so frightened he couldn't find anything. The scratching grew louder and louder and louder. Then the voice.
Taily po, where's my taily po? Give me back my taily po.
Smitty yelled back.
Leave me alone. I ain't got your taily po.
Then he called.
I know, you know, Comico Calico. Come on in here and protect your old master.
This time the dogs didn't come, so he called again.
I know, you know, Comico Calico. Don't you hear me calling you? Come here, doggies.
He waited and waited, but still not one dog came running. Smitty had never been so scared in his life. He ran to his bed and jumped in. The scratching and the voice grew louder and louder and louder. Smitty yelled back as loud as he could.
I ain't got no taily po, so why don't you leave me alone and go on about your business? I ain't never hurt nobody or nothing. Just leave me alone.
The scratching seemed to be inside the house now, and the voice was so loud it was deafening.
Taily po, you took my taily po, and now I'm gonna get it. Give it to me now.
Smitty pulled the cover up over his head and stayed as quiet as he could, but the scratching was now in his room.
Taily po, you better give me back my taily po.
Smitty then felt the thing scratching up at the bottom of the bed and onto his covers. Smitty eased the cover down to see what was steadily approaching. Then he saw it. A short, stubby creature with pointed ears, fat feet with long claws, and bloodshot red eyes that glowed in the dark. Eyes that seemed to burn straight through Smitty. Before he could pull the cover up over his head again, the thing pounced on his chest, looked straight down at him, and said,
You got my taily po, and you better give it back now.
Smitty yelled.
I ate it. I ate your taily po. It's gone.
And that thing started to scratch and claw and tear away at old poor Smitty, trying to get that taily po back. Smitty tried to fight back, but that thing was too strong and those claws were too sharp. Smitty's screams echoed throughout the dark mountains, then stopped, leaving a chilling silence. After a month or two, without hearing from Smitty, the folks who owned the store at the base of the mountain went up to his cabin to make sure everything was all right. When they got there, they found his cabin torn to shreds, but no sign of Smitty or the dogs. They searched the woods and called for them.
Smitty, I know, you know, come to go Calico. Hello?
But they never found a thing. As the search party was heading down the mountains, the wintry wind began to blow, and a strange voice could be heard saying,
Telepo, Telepo, now I've gotten my Telepo.
white eyes. The San Bernardino Mountains contain a lot of wilderness regions, which saw substantial activity about 100 years ago. Here, miners and loggers worked to bring materials down to the Los Angeles basin. But, like most industries of that time, there was a high profit motive, and workers' lives were not as important as they are now. One day, a mine tunnel collapsed, trapping a number of men within. They were able to survive, after a fashion, by drinking water which seeped into the tunnels, eating rats, mushrooms, and their dead co-workers. They worked from within to dig themselves out, confident that on the other side, others were digging from the outside in. Well, maybe not that confident, since the mining company was not known for its compassion. Well, it took them a while, but they finally managed to dig themselves out. Then, the formerly trapped miners found two surprises. First, since they had lived in darkness for a long period of time, they could no longer stand the sunlight, and their eyes were pure white, no color except for their pupils, which were dilated. Second, not one man had lifted a shovel to help dig them out. Then they made a pact, these men, to take revenge on those who had abandoned them. Soon after, mysterious instances of men being killed in the mountains occurred. These men were usually found mauled, bloody and torn. Close examination showed the teeth marks on them were from human teeth. One man was even beaten by his arm, which had been torn off at the shoulder. Soon thereafter, the mining company went out of business. No one was willing to work in those mountains, and even groups of men at night were at risk. Rumor had it that the White Eyes were out for blood. Now, since this happened about 100 years ago, and since only men were working in the mines, there should be no more White Eyes around. So we're safe. Or are we? Several years ago, a hiker was found mauled on the trail, with one of his arms ripped off and human teeth marks all over his body.